For 25 years, I lived as Uncle Rich, the man who loved his niece more than anything, who showed up when her own father wouldn't, who sat in the last row at her wedding behind a pillar that hid half the altar. What I didn't know was that a single throwaway comment from my ex-wife years ago would lead me to discover the devastating truth. "You don't even know what's truly yours in this house," she had said during our divorce. Now, decades later, I found myself staring at a DNA test result that would shatter 3 lives forever. When I finally revealed what I discovered, my ex-wife literally collapsed to the floor, and the young woman I'd loved from a distance her entire life looked at me with eyes that suddenly recognized something she'd always felt, but never understood. If you've ever wondered how far you'd go to uncover a buried truth, or what you'd do if everything you believed about your family was a lie, this is a story you need to hear. Follow our channel, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The truth can hurt, but some secrets were never meant to stay hidden. I was sitting in the back row of the church, hidden behind a pillar that obscured half the altar. No more seats available, they told me, which seemed ironic considering I'd paid for part of the ceremony. There I sat, invisible as always, watching my niece Emma get married, though niece was just what everyone called her. To me, she was my little girl, the same one who used to beg me to carry her on my shoulders whenever the world seemed too big for her tiny feet. I'm 63 now, with more salt than pepper in what's left of my hair. My hands shake slightly when I hold my coffee in the mornings, a constant reminder that time doesn't stop for heartbreak or injustice. It doesn't stop for anything. Growing up in our small Connecticut town, I believed family meant giving everything without expecting anything in return. I was the younger brother, the divorced one, the one living in an old house that smelled of damp wood and forgotten dreams. For 20 years, I made sure Emma never went without. Toys, clothes, support when her parents fought, and God knows they fought plenty, especially when my brother, her father, drank too much. I was there through her first steps, her first day of school, her first heartbreak. I was the one who taught her to ride a bike in Stillwater Park while my brother nursed another hangover. But sitting there at that wedding ceremony, watching the polished event unfold like some picture-perfect scene from a magazine, I realized I was nobody, not even a proper guest. My brother stood proudly at the altar, his expensive suit hiding the beer belly and the years of neglect, while I held back tears like a dog waiting outside the party door, hoping for scraps. As guests filed out afterward, I overheard one of Emma's friends whisper to another, "That's him. Her mom's ex-husband, you know? Kind of weird." The words stung worse than any physical blow I'd ever taken. That's all I was to them. The weird ex-husband. Not the man who'd spent countless nights reading bedtime stories. Not the man who'd driven 4 hours in a snowstorm to bring Emma her forgotten science project. Just weird. That moment triggered something in my memory. Something I'd spent years trying to forget. A throwaway comment from my ex-wife Lisa during one of our last arguments. "You don't even know what's truly yours in this house." She'd spat the words at me with such venom that I dismissed them as just another cruel barb. But now, 20 years later, they echoed in my mind with terrifying clarity. I remember that night so vividly. Lisa stood in our kitchen, the yellow light casting harsh shadows across her face. "You don't even know what's truly yours," she'd said, her eyes fixed on a photo of me holding baby Emma. At the time, I thought she meant the furniture, the house, the life we'd built. But what if, for the first time in 2 decades, I began to question everything. Myself, her, the life I'd been living. Had I been blind, or simply a fool? That night after the wedding, I drove home in silence, the weight of uncertainty crushing my chest. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. when I pulled into my driveway. I sat there, engine off, staring at the house I'd lived in alone for 20 years. A house filled with photos of a child I'd loved but who called someone else Dad. And in that moment, with the moonlight casting long shadows across my weathered face, I made a decision that would change everything. A decision born of doubt and desperation. A decision that would either destroy the fragile connections I still had, or finally give me the truth I deserved. Either way, there was no going back. 2 weeks after the wedding, my phone rang just as I was pouring my morning coffee. The steam rose in lazy spirals as I stared at the caller ID. Lisa. My ex-wife hadn't called me directly in years. Usually any communication came through brief text messages or through Emma. My hand trembled slightly as I answered, spilling a few drops of coffee onto my worn flannel pajama pants. "Richard," she said, her voice as controlled as ever. No hello, no pleasantries. That was Lisa, efficient to the point of coldness. I need you to come pick up some of your old things from my basement. I'm clearing out, and there's a box with your name on it. I wanted to ask why now after all these years, but something in her tone stopped me. There was an urgency there, hidden beneath the practiced nonchalance. When? I asked simply. Today, if possible. I'll be home until 4. Then she hung up, leaving me with the dial tone and a gnawing sense of unease. The drive to Lisa's house in Oak Ridge Hills took exactly 27 minutes, the same as it had when we were married. Some things never change, even when everything else does. Her house looked exactly as I remembered. The pristine white colonial with black shutters, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the cobblestone pathway I'd helped lay one sweltering August weekend 25 years ago. My palms sweated against the steering wheel as I pulled into the driveway, parking behind a sleek silver BMW I didn't recognize. Probably her new boyfriend's, the investment banker from Boston she'd been seeing, according to Emma. Lisa answered the door on the third knock. She looked older, of course, we both did, but still beautiful in that severe, untouchable way she'd always had. Her ash blonde hair was cut in a sharp bob now, and fine lines framed her blue eyes that barely met mine as she stepped aside. It's in the basement, the box with the red tape. She pointed toward the door at the end of the hallway. I need to make some calls. Just take what's yours and lock the door when you leave. With that, she disappeared into what used to be our home office, closing the door firmly behind her. The basement stairs creaked under my weight, a familiar soundtrack from a past life. The musty smell hit me immediately. Dampness and old paper and faint traces of laundry detergent. Lisa's basement was meticulously organized as always. Labeled boxes lined the shelves. Christmas, tax records, Emma, elementary school, Emma, high school. My chest tightened at that last one. How many moments had I missed? How many memories were stored in those cardboard containers that I'd never be part of? In the far corner, partially hidden behind a dusty treadmill, I spotted it. A medium-sized cardboard box with red packing tape across the top. Richard, personal, was written on the side in Lisa's precise handwriting. I lifted it, surprisingly light, and resisted the urge to open it there. Something told me Lisa wouldn't appreciate me lingering. As I carried the box up the stairs, I heard Lisa's voice from behind the office door. Yes, he's here now. No, he doesn't suspect anything. I know what I'm doing. Her words were hushed but clear enough to send a chill down my spine. I moved quickly then, not wanting her to know I'd overheard. I left without saying goodbye, the box secure in my arms like something precious and dangerous all at once. Back at my little ranch house on Maple Street, I set the box on my kitchen table. The overhead light buzzed softly. I'd been meaning to fix that for months, as I stared at this relic from my former life. What could possibly be in there that Lisa suddenly needed gone from her house? Part of me wanted to ignore it, to push it into a closet and forget about it, just as I'd tried to forget so much else. But that whispered conversation I'd overheard kept replaying in my mind. With a deep breath, I cut through the red tape and opened the flaps. Inside were the things you'd expect. Old college textbooks I'd forgotten about, a few vinyl records, a tarnished trophy from a softball league I'd played in during my 30s. Nothing that seemed important enough to warrant urgency. I was about to close it back up when I noticed something else tucked into the side of the box. A faded manila envelope yellowed with age. It wasn't sealed, and as I picked it up, a collection of papers slid partially out. Among them, I caught a glimpse of something that made my heart stutter. A letter addressed to me but never delivered. The handwriting was unmistakably Lisa's, and the date, God, the date, was from just 3 months after Emma was born. With fingers that suddenly felt numb, I pulled it out completely. The paper was thin, delicate with age, as if it might disintegrate at any moment. Like the truth it contained was too fragile for this world. If you're reading this, it began, it's because I can no longer bear the weight of hiding the truth. I did what I thought was right, but now I understand that perhaps I was just a coward. The rest was torn away. The paper ripped jaggedly as if in anger or haste. But those few lines were enough to shatter the carefully constructed reality I'd lived in for decades. In my mind, I could hear Lisa's words from that long-ago argument with crystal clarity. You don't even know what's truly yours in this house. For days afterward, I couldn't sleep. I paced my small house at night, examining every interaction. every memory through this new, terrible lens. I began noticing things I'd always ignored. The way my brother spoke about Emma with a strange, possessive pride. How Lisa had never allowed me to make decisions about Emma's education or health care. The way Emma's features, which I'd always thought resembled Lisa's family, suddenly seemed to mirror my own. And even without concrete proof, my heart screamed a truth I'd been blind to for 20 years. It was then that I made my decision. I would get a DNA test, in secret, and finally learn if the child I'd loved from afar was actually my own flesh and blood. Getting a DNA sample from Emma wasn't as difficult as I had imagined. 2 years ago, before she moved in with her now husband, she had stayed with me for a weekend while her apartment was being fumigated. That Saturday morning, I remember watching her brush her long chestnut hair that had always reminded me of my mother's, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. She'd left the brush on the bathroom counter when she departed, and something had stopped me from throwing it away. Maybe some sentimental part of me wanted to keep that small piece of her presence in my lonely house. I'd wrapped it in tissue paper and tucked it into my bedside drawer, where it had remained untouched until now. The brush still had strands of her hair tangled in its bristles. As I carefully extracted them with tweezers on a Tuesday evening in late September, my hands shook so badly I had to stop twice and take deep breaths. Was I really doing this? Was I about to unravel the fabric of lies that had clothed my life for over 2 decades? Outside, the wind rustled through the maple trees that lined my street, their leaves beginning to turn amber and crimson. Change was in the air, both in nature and in my life. Finding a lab that would conduct a discrete paternity test required more research than I expected. I couldn't risk using any local facilities. Our town was too small, and news traveled too fast. Eventually, I settled on a reputable laboratory 3 states away that promised confidentiality and accuracy. Their website was clinical and reassuring. Results within 3 to 4 weeks, 99.9% accuracy, complete privacy guaranteed. I packaged Emma's hair strands according to their instructions, added my own cheek swab, and drove to the next town over to mail the package. The postal worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, asked if I needed insurance on my package. I almost laughed at the irony. How do you ensure the potential destruction of everything you thought you knew? No, I said quietly. Just regular delivery is fine. As I watched her stamp the package and toss it into a bin, I felt as if I'd just lit a fuse on a stick of dynamite. There was no turning back now. The waiting period was excruciating. 3 weeks and 4 days of my life suspended in a hellish limbo. I went through the motions of daily existence, teaching my evening art history class at the community college, buying groceries, paying bills, but my mind constantly circled back to that envelope traveling through the postal system and the results that would eventually return to me. I began examining old photos of Emma as a child, searching for resemblances I might have missed. The shape of her eyes, weren't they similar to mine? And that dimple in her left cheek when she smiled, didn't I have the same one? Or was my mind simply manufacturing connections where none existed? I tortured myself with these questions, staring at photographs until my vision blurred. During this waiting period, Emma called twice. Casual conversations about her new job and married life. Each time I had to fight the urge to blurt out my suspicions. What would she think of me if she knew what I was doing? Would she be disgusted? Hurt? Or would some part of her have always suspected too? The package finally arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I'd been grading papers at my kitchen table when I heard the mail carrier's truck pull away. My heart hammering against my ribs, I walked to the front door with legs that felt like they might give way beneath me. There it was, a plain white envelope with the laboratory's discreet logo in the corner. I picked it up, surprised by how lightweight it felt for something so monumental. Back in the kitchen, I set it down on the table and just stared at it. My cold coffee sat forgotten beside a stack of half-graded essays. Outside, rain began to fall, droplets tapping against the window in an irregular rhythm that matched my racing pulse. I couldn't open it. Not yet. What if the results confirmed my worst fears? Or worse, what if they dashed this newfound hope that had begun to take root in my heart? I pushed the envelope away and went to bed, leaving it untouched on the table. The next day, I taught my classes with the envelope burning a hole in my thoughts. I fumbled through lectures I'd given dozens of times before, unable to focus. One student asked if I was feeling all right. Just a bit under the weather, I lied. That evening, I returned home and found the envelope exactly where I'd left it, bathed in the golden light of sunset. Again, I couldn't bring myself to open it. Instead, I fixed myself a microwave dinner and watched mindless television until midnight, studiously avoiding looking at the kitchen table. By the third day, the situation had become absurd. I was being held hostage by a piece of paper in my own home. I woke up early that Saturday, made a pot of coffee, and sat down at the table. The morning light was harsh and unforgiving as I picked up the envelope. "This is it," I whispered to the empty room. "Whatever happens, you'll deal with it." With trembling fingers, I tore open the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the laboratory's letterhead. I took a deep breath, pressed my back against the kitchen wall for support, and began to read. The first line hit me like a physical blow. Genetic relationship. Biological father compatibility confirmed at 99.98%. My body convulsed with an emotion I couldn't name, something between shock, vindication, and a grief so profound it felt like drowning. The coffee mug slipped from my hand and shattered on the linoleum floor, but I barely noticed. I slid down the wall until I was sitting, the test results clutched in my fist, hot tears streaming down my face. Emma was my daughter. My daughter, not my niece. Not my brother's child, mine. All these years of loving her from the periphery of her life, of being the weird uncle, the outsider, when I should have been her father, when I was her father. A lifetime of moments stolen from us both by Lisa's deception and my brother's betrayal. As the realization fully dawned on me, I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or scream. So I did all three, there on my kitchen floor, amidst broken ceramic and cooling coffee, holding the paper that had just rewritten my entire existence. The week after receiving the DNA results was a blur of sleepless nights and agonizing deliberation. I'd leave for work in the morning with my shirt buttoned wrong, return home to find I'd left the front door unlocked all day. My neighbor, Mrs. Perkins, even stopped me one afternoon to ask if everything was all right. Apparently, she'd seen me standing motionless at my mailbox for nearly 15 minutes, staring at nothing. How could I tell her that I was paralyzed by the knowledge that my entire life had been built on a foundation of lies, that the woman I once loved and the brother I'd trusted had conspired to keep me from my own daughter, that I was grappling with 25 years of stolen birthdays, school plays, skinned knees, and bedtime stories? I kept the DNA results in my wallet, folded and refolded so many times that the creases were starting to tear. Sometimes, in the middle of teaching a class or shopping for groceries, I'd take it out just to make sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The words remained unchanged. Biological father compatibility confirmed at 99.98%. On Friday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Uncle Rich, Mark, and I were wondering if we could come over for dinner tomorrow. Around 6? I'll bring dessert." My fingers hovered over the screen. Uncle Rich. Each time she called me that now felt like a knife twisting in my gut. But I typed back, "Sounds great. Looking forward to it." I spent all of Saturday cleaning my modest house from top to bottom, as if scrubbing the baseboards could somehow wipe away decades of deception. I prepared a pot roast, Emma's favorite since childhood, and set the table with the good dishes my mother had left me. The ones I only used for special occasions, though God knows there had been few enough of those in recent years. At precisely 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Emma stood on my porch, her husband Mark slightly behind her, holding what looked like a frozen pie in a plastic container. She wore her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, revealing the delicate features of her face. Features that now, with my new knowledge, I could clearly see mirrored aspects of my own. "Hi, Uncle Rich," she said, giving me a quick hug. The casual embrace felt both precious and painful. Did she notice how I held on a moment too long? How my eyes lingered on her face, searching for more similarities between us? Mark shook my hand firmly. He was a decent guy, an accountant with a calm demeanor and genuine smile. I'd always liked him, appreciated how he treated Emma with respect and adoration. Now I found myself wondering, did he know? Had Lisa or my brother ever told him the truth? Over dinner, Emma chatted about their honeymoon in Hawaii, about the starter home they'd just put a deposit on in the suburbs, about her new promotion at the marketing firm where she worked. I nodded and smiled and asked all the right questions, but inside, I was screaming. Every casual mention of her childhood, of moments my brother had experienced instead of me, felt like salt in an open wound. "Remember that time Dad taught me to swim at Lake George?" she asked, laughing as she recounted how my brother had thrown her into the deep end, insisting it was the fastest way to learn. I was so mad at him. I gripped my fork harder, knuckles turning white. That should have been me. It should have been my memories she was recalling with fondness, not his. As we moved to the living room with coffee and the thawed store-bought pie, Emma said something that made my heart stop. You know, Uncle Rich, you've always been kind of like a father figure to me. In some ways more than Dad. My coffee cup rattled against its saucer. Mark seemed oblivious, scrolling through something on his phone, but Emma was looking at me with a puzzled expression. Are you okay? You look pale. That was the moment. Sitting in my worn leather armchair, with Emma perched on the edge of my sofa cushion, concern etched across her familiar features. I could feel the DNA results burning in my back pocket where I'd transferred them from my wallet. The truth was right there, just waiting to be revealed. My throat felt like sandpaper as I stood up. There's something I need to show you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I walked to the sideboard where I'd placed the envelope earlier that day, half hoping I wouldn't have the courage to go through with this. But Emma's words, like a father figure, echoed in my head. She didn't know how right she was. My hands trembled as I placed the envelope on the coffee table between us. What's this? She asked, curiosity replacing concern. Open it, I managed to say. Please. Just as Emma reached for the envelope, the front door opened. We all turned, startled by the intrusion. There stood Lisa, my ex-wife, clutching her purse to her chest like a shield. Emma, I forgot my... Lisa began, then froze when she saw the envelope on the table. The color drained from her face so rapidly I thought she might faint on the spot. Richard, she said, my name coming out as more of a gasp than a word. What are you doing? Emma looked between us, confusion evident in her furrowed brow. Mom, what are you doing here? How did you know I was at Uncle Rich's? Lisa didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the envelope, recognition and panic washing over her features in waves. She knew exactly what it contained. Emma, I said quietly, never taking my eyes off Lisa. Just read it, please. With hesitant fingers, Emma opened the envelope and pulled out the paper inside. I watched her face as she read, her expression transforming from puzzlement to disbelief to shock in the span of seconds. Her lips moved silently, forming the words that had changed my world. Biological father compatibility confirmed. She looked up at me, then at Lisa, who had now collapsed into the nearest chair, her face ashen. Mom? Emma's voice was barely audible. Is this true? Is Uncle Rich, is he my father? The room seemed to vibrate with tension. Mark had put down his phone, looking bewildered and uncomfortable. Lisa's breathing was shallow and rapid, and Emma, my daughter, stared at her mother with eyes that begged for denial, for some explanation that would make sense of this revelation. When Lisa finally spoke, her voice was hollow. I never meant for you to find out like this. And with those 9 words, she confirmed everything. The silence that followed Lisa's confession was deafening. Emma's face contorted with shock and betrayal, her eyes darting between Lisa and me as if trying to reassemble the fragments of her shattered reality. Mark sat frozen beside her, his mouth slightly open, a forgotten fork of pie suspended midway to his lips. What? Emma finally managed, her voice thin and strained. What did you just say? Lisa's hands twisted in her lap, knuckles white against the dark fabric of her pants. I said I never meant for you to find out like this, she repeated, a slight tremor in her voice. I wanted to protect you. Protect me? Emma stood so abruptly that her coffee cup toppled, sending a dark stain spreading across my beige carpet. Nobody moved to clean it up. Protect me from what? From knowing who my real father is? Lisa reached toward her, but Emma recoiled as if her mother's touch might burn. It's complicated, honey. Your father, I mean Robert, he was going through such a difficult time back then, and Richard and I were separated and... Stop. Emma's command cut through the room like a blade. She turned to me, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. Did you know? All this time, did you know I was your daughter? The question hit me like a physical blow. No, I said, my voice rough with emotion. I swear to God, Emma, I only found out last week. I did the DNA test in secret because I began to suspect after finding an old letter from your mother. Emma's face crumpled. Without another word, she bolted for the door, shouldering past Lisa with enough force to make her stagger. Mark jumped up, looking helplessly between his fleeing wife and the two of us. "Emma, wait!" Lisa cried, rushing after her. Through the open door, I could see Emma running down my front path, her figure blurred by the light drizzle that had begun to fall. Lisa made it as far as the sidewalk before her knees seemed to give out. She swayed, reached for the mailbox to steady herself, and then collapsed in a heap on the wet concrete. Mark hurried out to help her while I stood rooted to the spot, a strange detachment washing over me. Part of me wanted to run after Emma, to explain, to comfort her somehow. But another part, the part that had suffered in silence for 25 years, felt a grim satisfaction at the implosion of Lisa's carefully constructed lies. From my doorway, I watched as Mark helped Lisa to her feet. She was conscious but pale, leaning heavily on him as he guided her back toward the house. Her designer blouse was soaked through, her perfectly styled hair now plastered to her face by the rain. For a moment, with her defenses stripped away by shock, I caught a glimpse of the young woman I'd once loved desperately. Before the betrayal, before everything went wrong. "She needs to sit down," Mark said as they reached the door, his voice tight with strain. She almost fainted. I stepped aside mechanically, allowing them back into my living room. Mark settled Lisa on the sofa and asked for a glass of water. In the kitchen, as I filled a glass from the tap, I caught sight of my reflection in the window above the sink. I looked old, I realized with a start. The lines around my eyes and mouth seemed to have deepened in the past hour, the gray in my hair more pronounced against my pallid skin. When I returned to the living room, Lisa was bent forward with her head between her knees, Mark's hand resting awkwardly on her back. The DNA test results lay discarded on the coffee table, the official-looking paper now stained with drops of spilled coffee. "Where would Emma go?" I asked, setting the water down with a dull thunk. Mark looked up, his face etched with worry. "I don't know. Maybe to our apartment or to a friend's. Should I go after her?" Before either of us could decide, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Emma. "I need space. Don't try to find me tonight." I showed the message to Mark, who seemed to deflate slightly with relief. "At least we know she's okay," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I should probably give her some time, right?" Lisa raised her head, her face blotchy and her eyes rimmed with red. "This is all your fault," she said, staring at me with naked hostility. "We were fine. We were all fine until you had to dig up the past." A surge of anger, hot and clarifying, rushed through me. "Fine? You call this fine? Living a lie for 25 years? Denying me my own daughter? Letting my brother raise her while I watched from the sidelines? I did what I thought was best." Lisa shot back, her voice rising. "Robert could provide for her in ways you never could. He was stable, established." "He was an alcoholic!" I shouted, years of repressed fury finally breaking free. "He missed half her childhood because he was passed out or at the bar. I was the one who showed up for her science fairs, her soccer games, her—" "Stop it, both of you," Mark interjected, looking thoroughly uncomfortable. "This isn't helping Emma." His words doused my anger like cold water. He was right. None of this was about Lisa or me or my brother anymore. It was about Emma, my daughter, who had just had her entire identity thrown into question. An uncomfortable silence settled over the room, broken only by the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner and the occasional sniffle from Lisa. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the windows and roof in a steady rhythm. "What happens now?" Mark finally asked, his voice small in the large, quiet room. Neither Lisa nor I had an answer for him. The three of us sat there, trapped in a moment, suspended between the lies of the past and the uncertain truth of the future. The half-eaten pie sat forgotten on the coffee table. The spilled coffee had stopped spreading, leaving an irregular brown stain on the carpet, a permanent reminder of this night, just as the revelation would forever mark all our lives. The next morning, Emma called me. Her voice was hoarse, as if she'd been crying all night. "I need some time," she said without preamble. "But I feel something I can't explain. When I look back at all the times you were there for me, it makes a different kind of sense now." I gripped the phone tightly, afraid to hope. "Take all the time you need," I managed to say. "Thank you." There was a pause, filled with unspoken words and emotions too complex to name. Then she added, "I'll call you in a few days." It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance. Not yet. But it was something. A beginning. And for the first time in 25 years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, The truth could heal what lies had broken. 3 days after the revelation, my doorbell rang at 7:15 in the morning. I was already awake. Sleep had become an elusive luxury. Sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the rain-streaked window. The world outside seemed appropriately gray and sodden, matching my mood. I wasn't expecting anyone, especially not at this hour. Opening the door, I found Emma standing on my porch, her hair damp from the drizzle, a small overnight bag clutched in her hand. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally impeccable appearance was disheveled, as if she'd dressed in a hurry. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice small but steady. I stepped aside wordlessly, my heart hammering against my ribs. She entered and stood awkwardly in my hallway, looking both familiar and like a stranger all at once. My daughter. The thought still sent shockwaves through me each time it surfaced. "I've been staying at a hotel," she said, setting her bag down. "I needed space to think. Mark's been calling, but I just couldn't talk to anyone yet." I nodded, unsure what to say. What words could possibly address the seismic shift in our relationship? "Do you want some coffee?" I finally offered, falling back on the mundane in the face of the extraordinary. She followed me to the kitchen, where she perched on the edge of a chair, her fingers drumming nervously on the tabletop. I poured her a cup from the pot that had been warming for hours, noticing how her hands trembled slightly as she accepted it. "Mom's been calling non-stop," she said after taking a small sip. "And Rob..." She stopped abruptly, her brow furrowing. I don't even know what to call him now. "Dad? Uncle? The man who raised me, thinking he was my father?" Her laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. "You can still call him Dad," I said gently. "He was your father in all the ways that counted day to day." Emma's eyes flashed. "Was he, though? He was barely there. Half my memories of childhood have you in them, not him. You were the one who taught me to ride a bike, who helped me with my science projects, who came to my softball games." Her voice cracked. "And all that time you knew I wasn't really your niece. You were just, what, playing along with their sick game?" The accusation stung, all the more painful because it was so far from the truth. "Emma, I swear to you I had no idea. If I had known..." My voice failed me as emotion welled up, threatening to overflow. She studied my face intently, searching for deception. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because her posture softened slightly. "Then tell me everything," she said. "From the beginning. I need to understand how this happened." And so I did. Sitting across from my daughter at my worn kitchen table, with rain pattering against the windows and the refrigerator humming in the background, I recounted the story of her mother and me. How we'd met in college, fallen deeply in love, married young. How my brother had always been envious of our relationship, always a little too interested in Lisa. How our marriage had begun to fracture after 3 years, culminating in a brief separation during which apparently Lisa and my brother had become involved. "When your mother told me she was pregnant, I was overjoyed," I explained, the old pain returning as fresh as yesterday. "I thought it meant a new beginning for us. But about 5 months into the pregnancy, she asked for a divorce. Said she'd fallen out of love with me, that she needed to find herself." I shook my head at the memory. 2 months after you were born, she married my brother. I was devastated, but I never once suspected that I wasn't his. Emma finished for me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Never," I confirmed. "It wasn't until I found that torn letter in the box she gave me that I began to wonder." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing. Then she asked the question that I knew had been haunting her. "Why didn't you fight for custody? If you suspected I might be yours, why didn't you demand a paternity test back then?" I closed my eyes briefly, the weight of lost years pressing down on me. "I didn't suspect until 2 weeks ago, Emma. For 25 years I believed you were my niece. I loved you fiercely, but I never imagined..." I trailed off, then forced myself to continue. "And even if I had known, your mother and brother had all the power, money, stability, a 2-parent household. I was struggling financially after the divorce, living in a tiny apartment, working 2 jobs. What judge would have given me custody?" Emma nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her eyes. "So instead, you stayed close. You became the fun uncle, the reliable presence in my life. It was the only way I could be part of your world," I admitted. "And even that wasn't easy. Your mother often found excuses to cancel visits to keep you away from me. There were birthdays I wasn't invited to, school events I only learned about afterward." Her face darkened. "I remember." She always had some reason why you couldn't come, or why we had to cut visits short. She looked around my modest kitchen, seeing it with new eyes. All those times you gave me presents that seemed too expensive for you. You were sacrificing to make me happy, weren't you? I shrugged, uncomfortable with her gratitude. That's what parents do. The word hung between us, new and tentative yet profound. Emma stood suddenly and walked to her overnight bag. From it, she withdrew a faded photograph, creased and worn at the edges. She placed it on the table between us. I found this in Mom's garage last night, when I went to get some of my old things, she said quietly. It was in a box labeled trash. I picked up the photo and felt my throat constrict. It showed a much younger me holding a toddler Emma on my shoulders at what appeared to be a county fair. Both of us were laughing, my hands securely gripping her tiny legs, her small fingers tangled in my hair. The right side of the photo had been cut off, and I knew with certainty that Lisa had been standing beside us in the original image. She erased you, Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just from the photo, but from my life. From your rightful place as my father. I couldn't speak. The physical evidence of Lisa's determination to excise me from Emma's life was overwhelming. All those years of being sidelined, of watching from the periphery, of loving from a distance prescribed by others, they coalesced in that mutilated photograph. Emma moved around the table and, for the first time since she was a small child seeking comfort after a scraped knee or a nightmare, she wrapped her arms around me in a real embrace. Not the perfunctory hug of a niece greeting her uncle, but the profound connection of a daughter recognizing her father. I'm so sorry, she whispered against my shoulder, for all the years we lost, for every Father's Day card I never sent you, for every time I called another man dad when it should have been you. And there in my shabby kitchen with its outdated appliances and chipped countertops, holding my daughter, truly holding her, for the first time as her father, I finally allowed myself to weep for all we had lost and for the precious second chance we had miraculously been given. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, nearly 3 weeks after Emma had come to stay with me. I recognized the return address immediately. Westbrook and Associates, Lisa's longtime attorneys, an upscale firm in downtown Hartford that catered to the city's elite. My fingers felt numb as I sliced open the envelope, already anticipating its contents. Inside was a formal notice informing me that I was being sued by Lisa Marie Caldwell for invasion of privacy, emotional distress, and, most absurdly, malicious interference with familial relations. The language was cold and clinical, the allegations laid out in neat bullet points that transformed my desperate search for truth into something sordid and calculated. I sank into my porch chair, the autumn breeze rustling the fallen leaves around my feet as I read and reread the document. According to Lisa's lawyers, I had, knowingly and with malicious intent, obtained genetic material without consent, and had deliberately exposed private family matters with the express purpose of damaging the plaintiff's relationship with her daughter. The irony was almost too much to bear. Lisa, who had concealed my own child from me for 25 years, was now claiming that I was the one who had damaged familial relationships. The lawsuit demanded $250,000 in damages, a sum so far beyond my means that it might as well have been $2.5 million. When Emma returned from grocery shopping an hour later, she found me still sitting on the porch, the legal papers spread across my lap like fallen autumn leaves. "What's wrong?" she asked, setting down the paper bags. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I wordlessly handed her the documents. Her face hardened as she scanned the pages, her jaw clenching tighter with each paragraph she read. "This is insane," she finally said, her voice trembling with anger. "After everything she's done, she's suing you? For what? For telling me the truth about my own life?" I rubbed my eyes wearily. "I think she's panicking. This is her way of trying to regain control of the narrative." Emma crumpled the papers in her fist. "Well, it won't work. I'm calling Mark. His cousin is an attorney. We'll fight this." Over the next few days, we consulted with several lawyers. The consensus was disheartening. While Lisa's case might be morally bankrupt, there were legitimate legal concerns about how I'd obtained Emma's DNA. The fact that I'd kept the brush for years might be construed as premeditation, and sending genetic material for testing without consent existed in a murky legal area. The best strategy might be to settle, suggested Janet Kwan, a sharp-eyed attorney who specialized in family law. "Even if we win, the legal fees could bankrupt you." But Emma was adamant. "We're not settling. Mom needs to face consequences for once in her life. I worried about the toll this was taking on her. In the 3 weeks she'd been staying with me, Emma had barely spoken to her mother, responding to Lisa's increasingly frantic calls and texts with terse, one-word answers. Her relationship with my brother, the man she'd called Dad her entire life, was even more strained. She refused to speak to him at all. He knew, she told me one evening as we sat on my back deck, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had to have known I wasn't his. The timing, the way Mom rushed into marriage with him right after divorcing you. It's too convenient. I wasn't so sure. My brother had many faults, but I couldn't quite bring myself to believe he'd knowingly raised another man's child, my child, while keeping me in the dark. The betrayal would be too profound, too calculated, but I kept these doubts to myself. Emma was struggling enough with having her entire identity thrown into question. She didn't need my conflicted feelings about my brother complicating matters further. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the first week of November, an appropriately gray and somber month. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in an unflattering pallor. Lisa sat on the opposite side of the room, flanked by 2 attorneys in expensive suits. She looked thinner than I remembered, her face taut with stress but still elegant in a tailored navy dress and pearls, the uniform of Connecticut old money, which she'd adopted so seamlessly after marrying my brother. She didn't look at me once during the proceedings, keeping her gaze fixed either on her attorneys or on the judge, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. My brother was conspicuously absent. Emma, however, was there, sitting beside me in a simple black dress, her back straight, her expression resolute. When the clerk called the case, she squeezed my hand briefly, a small gesture of solidarity that meant everything. Lisa's attorney spoke first, painting me as an obsessed, jealous ex-husband who had never accepted the end of our marriage and who had, decades later, deliberately set out to destroy Lisa's relationship with her daughter through underhanded means. Mr. Caldwell obtained Ms. Thornton's genetic material without her knowledge or consent, the lawyer intoned, gesturing toward Emma with a theatrical flourish. He then used the results of this unauthorized test to create a rift between mother and daughter, causing my client severe emotional distress and reputational damage. Our attorney, Janet Kwan, listened with an expression of practiced neutrality, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When it was her turn to speak, she stood calmly, adjusted her glasses, and addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, this case is not about invasion of privacy. It's about truth. For 25 years, Ms. Bryant deliberately concealed from Mr. Caldwell that he was the biological father of her daughter. She denied him his parental rights, denied Ms. Thornton the opportunity to know her real father, and maintained a fiction that has caused immeasurable harm to both my client and his daughter. As Janet continued methodically dismantling Lisa's claims, I noticed the judge's expression shifting slightly, her gaze moving between Lisa and me with increased interest. Then came the moment that changed everything. The judge asked if Emma would like to make a statement. Without hesitation, Emma rose and walked to the front of the courtroom. In a clear, steady voice that belied the emotion I knew she must be feeling, she began to speak. For my entire life, I was told that Robert Caldwell was my father. I called Richard Caldwell Uncle Rich. I sent Father's Day cards to the wrong man. I asked the wrong man to walk me down the aisle at my wedding. Her voice caught slightly, but she continued. And all that time, my mother knew the truth. She deliberately kept me from my real father, not because he was unfit or unloving, but because it was more convenient for her narrative. The courtroom was utterly silent as Emma spoke, every eye fixed on her slight figure standing proudly before the bench. If anyone's privacy was invaded, it was mine, invaded by the lies I was told from the day I was born. If anyone has suffered emotional distress, it's Richard Caldwell, who loved me as a niece when he should have been allowed to love me as a daughter. Lisa made a small, choked sound from her seat, but Emma didn't look at her. I'm not a minor, Your Honor. I'm 35 years old, and I have the right to know who my father is. Richard Caldwell gave me that right. He gave me the truth, and I will be forever grateful to him for that. When Emma returned to her seat beside me, her cheeks were wet with tears, but she was smiling. And for the first time since this legal battle began, I felt a flicker of hope that truth might actually prevail. Today I write this story from my worn leather armchair, the one with the small tear on the right armrest where Emma's cat, Mr. Whiskers, decided to sharpen his claws last month. The afternoon light filters through the half-drawn curtains, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. From the kitchen comes the sound of Emma's laughter as she talks on the phone with Mark about their plans to renovate the guest bedroom, or, as they've started calling it, the nursery. They're not expecting yet, but they're hoping. And the thought that I might someday hold my grandchild in these aging arms brings a warmth to my chest that no winter chill can touch. It's been almost a year since that day in court, when Judge Harriet Samuels dismissed Lisa's lawsuit with barely concealed contempt. This court, she had declared, peering sternly over her reading glasses, will not be used as a tool to perpetuate decades of deception. While Mr. Caldwell's methods of discovering the truth may have been unconventional, they pale in comparison to the systematic denial of his paternal rights. Case dismissed. I remember the stunned silence that followed, broken only by the soft thud of the judge's gavel. Lisa had sat motionless, her face ashen, while her attorneys whispered urgently in her ear. Emma had turned to me, tears streaming down her face, and whispered, "It's over. We won." But winning in court didn't magically heal 25 years of lies and loss. The months that followed were a delicate dance of rediscovering each other, father and daughter learning who we truly were beneath the labels that had been forced upon us. Emma moved back in with Mark after a month of staying with me, but she visited almost daily. We spent hours looking through old photo albums, filling in the gaps in our shared history. She'd point to a picture, Emma at 8, holding up a science fair ribbon, Emma at 12, sitting on my shoulders at a baseball game, and ask, "What were you thinking here? Did you suspect anything?" The truth was, I hadn't. I'd loved her fiercely but blindly, never questioning why my heart seemed to recognize her as mine long before my mind caught up. "Love doesn't always need DNA to know," I told her once, and she'd nodded, understanding in a way that only someone who had lived our particular story could. My relationship with my brother Robert, however, was beyond repair. After the court case, he'd shown up at my door late one night, clearly drunk, his expensive suit rumpled and his eyes bloodshot. "You had to ruin everything, didn't you?" He'd slurred, swaying slightly on my front porch. "Wasn't enough that Lisa chose me over you back then. You had to take my daughter too." "She was never your daughter," I'd replied quietly, the words still strange and powerful on my tongue. "And Lisa didn't choose you. She chose your money, your status. Don't confuse the two." He'd lunged at me then, a clumsy attack that I easily sidestepped, sending him sprawling onto the porch boards. As he struggled to his feet, more pathetic than threatening, I felt the last remnants of brotherly feeling drain away. "Go home, Robert. Get help. And stay away from Emma unless she reaches out to you." I haven't seen him since, though Emma tells me he's moved to Florida with his new girlfriend, a woman half his age with bleached blonde hair and a penchant for expensive jewelry. Lisa, I hear, has thrown herself into charity work, carefully constructing a public image of selfless generosity that contrasts sharply with the private reality Emma and I know too well. Emma still calls her mom, though their relationship has changed irrevocably. They meet occasionally for carefully orchestrated lunches in public places, where the need to maintain appearances keeps raw emotions in check. "It's like talking to a stranger who knows all my secrets," Emma told me after one such meeting. "I can't hate her. She raised me, and in her own way I think she loves me. But I'll never trust her again. Trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered, painstakingly rebuilt. Emma and I have been rebuilding ours brick by brick, conversation by conversation. The first time she called me Dad, we were washing dishes after Sunday dinner. She'd handed me a dripping plate and said, "Here you go, Dad," so casually that it took a moment for the word to register. The plate had slipped from my fingers, shattering on the kitchen tile, and we'd both stared at the broken pieces before bursting into slightly hysterical laughter. "Sorry," she'd said, reaching for the broom. "Too soon?" "No," I'd managed, my voice thick with emotion. Perfect timing, actually. Since then, Dad has become natural, flowing from her lips as if it had always belonged there. Each time I hear it, my heart reconstructs a little more of what was broken all those years ago. There are still moments of grief, of course, sudden ambushes of sorrow for all the firsts I missed. Her first steps, her first day of school, her graduation, her wedding. But there are new firsts, too. The first time she asked my advice as her father, not her uncle. The first Father's Day card with Dad, written in her elegant script, the first time she brought Mark to meet me not as her uncle, but as her father. If I had opened that DNA test envelope years earlier, perhaps I could have avoided so much pain, but perhaps we wouldn't have appreciated this moment now, with all its poignant intensity. Because truth, even when it arrives belatedly, has the power to heal wounds we didn't even know we carried. In the end, I've learned that there are bonds that withstand time, lies, and pain. And even though I was the last to know the truth about Emma, I was the first to love her unconditionally. And that, as it turns out, is the one thing no one can ever take away. From my armchair, I can see Emma in the kitchen, her phone tucked between ear and shoulder as she absent-mindedly stirs a pot of her infamous chili. The autumn sunlight catches her hair, highlighting the strands that are the exact same shade as mine once were. She looks up, catches me watching, and smiles. A smile that reflects back all the love I've given her over the years, multiplied and returned with interest. "Dad," she mouths silently, eyes crinkling with affection. Hungry, and in that simple moment, in that ordinary exchange between father and daughter, I find the extraordinary gift I never thought I'd receive. The chance to be exactly who I was, always meant to be. Sometimes the truth finds its way to the surface no matter how deeply it's buried. Richard's story reminds us that while we can't change the past, we can reclaim our future, even when decades of lies stand in the way. What would you have done in his position? Would you have opened that envelope knowing it might shatter the fragile connections you still had? Or would you have let sleeping dogs lie, content with loving from a distance? Family isn't always defined by blood, but when blood and love align, there's a recognition that transcends explanation, a connection that persists despite decades of deception. Perhaps the most powerful lesson from Richard's journey is that it's never too late for truth to heal what lies have broken. His patience, his unwavering love through years of being sidelined, ultimately created the foundation for a relationship that could withstand even the most shocking revelation. If this story touched your heart, or made you think about the relationships in your own life, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Every family has its secrets, but not every secret deserves to be kept. Follow our channel for more powerful true stories that remind us of the complexity, pain, and beauty of being human. What truth in your life might be waiting to be discovered?